No books, no writing. Only fossilized bones, chipped stone tools, and piles of blackened ash lingering in caves. That's all we have to trace back 99% of human history, the prehistoric era. The true story of humanity begins in one place, Africa. Around 7 million years ago, a branch of primates began to split from the common ancestor shared with chimpanzees. Early fossils, like Sahelanthropus chidensis and Australopithecus afarensis, known as Lucy, reveal a crucial breakthrough. Bipedalism, the ability to walk on two legs, was the first turning point that launched the human evolutionary journey. Then, about 2.8 million years ago, the earliest fossils of the genus Homo, Homo habilis, were discovered in Ethiopia. They had larger brains and were capable of crafting and using flake-based stone jewels. This marked the shift from ape to human, beings who could shape tools and manipulate their environment intentionally. By 1.8 million years ago, Homo erectus left Africa, marking the first human migration. They reached West Asia, East Asia, and Southeast Asia, leaving traces in places like Georgia, China, and the island of Java. Most importantly, they were the first to control fire, around 400,000 to 300,000 years ago, a discovery that radically transformed the human way of life. However, our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens, didn't appear until about 300,000 years ago in Africa. Evolving from Homo heidelbergensis, they had modern skulls, flatter cheekbones, and complex cognitive abilities. Around 70,000 years ago, a group of Homo sapiens left Africa. They became the ancestors of all non-African people today. Their journey spanned tens of thousands of years, reaching Australia by around 65,000 years ago, Europe by 45,000 years ago, and finally the Americas around 21,000 years ago via the Bering Land Bridge. During this time, humans lived as hunter-gatherers in small nomadic groups, but they were far from primitive. They painted caves at Chauvet and Lascaux. They crafted musical instruments like the 40,000-year-old bone flutes found in Germany, and quite possibly, they already had syntactic language, allowing them to express abstract thoughts. From within the darkness of prehistory, the first humans began writing history, not with words, but with footprints left across the entire planet. Part 2. The Agricultural Revolution, a quiet transformation. Around 10,000 years ago, something unprecedented in millions of years of evolution occurred. Humans stopped wandering. In Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, they no longer hunted, they planted seeds. They stopped chasing wild herds and instead kept gentle sheep inside fences. This was the beginning of the agricultural revolution, a quiet but radical transformation, from hunting and gathering to farming and herding. Remarkably, this revolution happened independently in several parts of the world. In the Middle East, people grew wheat and barley and domesticated sheep and goats, approximately 8500 BCE. In China, rice cultivation began along the Yangtze River around 8000 BCE, while millet was planted near the Yellow River. In the Americas, ancient people invented maize, squash, beans, and potatoes. In the Andes, they domesticated llamas. Across ancient Sahara Africa, people grew millet, cowpeas, and sorghum. Settling down led to the birth of villages, and for the first time, fixed assets appeared. People began to accumulate rice in jars, pottery in houses, livestock in yards, and wherever there was accumulation, there was conflict. Wherever there was fertile land, there was war. In Çatalhöyük, now in Turkey, 7500 BCE, a large town emerged with hundreds of mud brick houses built tightly together without streets. People walked across rooftops. Strangely, the dead were buried beneath the bedroom floors, as if the past and the present always coexisted. In Jericho, one of the oldest cities in the world, stone walls as high as 5 meters were erected around 7000 BCE. These may have been the first fortresses, built not only to defend against nature, but also against other humans. As food became abundant, not everyone needed to farm. Some specialized in crafting tools and pottery, or bartering goods. Others became leaders, shamans or grain keepers, and eventually scribes. Writing was not born to tell stories, it was born to record taxes and grain inventories. And so, from the first fields of wheat, civilization began to form, not by sword and blood, but by hoe and seed. Part 3, Civilization and Empire, when history began to be written. Around 3000 BCE, the first cities began to rise along the great rivers. In Mesopotamia, there was Uruk, a city of over 50,000 people, with towering ziggurat temples. In Egypt, Memphis became the power center of the pharaohs. Along the Indus River, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro showcased astonishing urban planning, straight roads, underground drainage, and public bathhouses. In China, the Yellow River civilization began with the Xia and Shang dynasties. The Sumerians in Mesopotamia invented cuneiform writing around 3200 BCE, first used for grain records, later for literature, law codes, and historical chronicles. In Egypt, hieroglyphs emerged around the same time. In China, oracle bone script, etched onto turtle shells and animal bones during the Shang dynasty, approximately 1200 BCE, became the only ancient writing system still in use today in evolved form. In Europe, ancient Greece flourished with city-states like Athens and Sparta. From the 5th century BCE, Athens experimented with democracy, and philosophy blossomed through Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Later, Rome expanded from a small town into an empire that spanned the Mediterranean and lasted over 1,000 years, leaving a lasting legacy in law, language, and architecture. Most remarkably, from around 800 to 200 BCE, humanity entered a profound intellectual era known as the Axial Age. In India, Buddhism and Jainism emerged. In China, Confucianism and Taoism took shape. In Persia, Zoroastrianism. Among the Hebrews, monotheism developed. And in Greece, rational thought and foundational philosophy arose. All of this occurred almost simultaneously, not because of war or migration, but from the spiritual and intellectual ferment within each civilization. For the first time, humans not only asked how to live, but dared to ask why they live and how they should live. From this point onward, history was no longer recorded just in stone, but in ideas. Part 4, Fall of Empires, Rise of Religion, 500 to 1500. In the year 476, the Western Roman Empire officially collapsed. This marked the beginning of the Middle Ages in Europe, a period lasting nearly 1,000 years, during which the Catholic Church rose to become the supreme authority, replacing emperors. The once mighty city of Rome fell into ruin, trade declined, roads broke down. Local lords took control of the land, forming a feudal system where kings, nobles, knights, and peasants were bound together by oaths of loyalty and military duty. Amid the darkness of political fragmentation, religion became the unifying force. The Roman Church not only governed souls, but also controlled knowledge. Bibles were copied in monasteries, and the majority of the population remained illiterate. While Europe splintered, a new religion emerged on the Arabian Peninsula. In 610, the Prophet Muhammad declared he had received revelations from God, and Islam was born. Within a century, the Islamic Empire expanded rapidly, conquering all of West Asia, North Africa, and even reaching into Spain. Far from being a dark age, the Islamic world entered a golden age of knowledge. In Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo, scholars translated Greek texts and made groundbreaking advances in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. In the East, China flourished under the Tang, 618 to 907, and Song, 970 to 1279 dynasties. It was the birthplace of the compass, gunpowder, printing technology, and a civil service examination system based on merit. One of the most advanced political systems of its time. In the Americas, the Maya civilization reached its peak in astronomy and hieroglyphic writing. Teotihuacan built the largest pyramid in the Western Hemisphere. Later, the Aztec and Inca rose as powerful empires, building roads, practicing terrace farming, and developing complex belief systems. In Africa, the Mali Empire under Mansa Musa became wealthy through its gold trade. The University of Sankore in Timbuktu emerged as a renowned center of learning. To the east, Ethiopia remained a Christian stronghold surrounded by an expanding Islamic world. But the height of the crisis came between 1347 and 1351, when the Black Death swept across Europe. An estimated 25 to 50 million people died, nearly one-third of the continent's population. Villages were abandoned, monasteries fell silent, and faith in the old order began to crumble. Empires collapsed, religion ruled, and darkness seemed eternal. But deep within it, a new world was preparing to rise. Part 5: Early Modernity, Discovery, Renaissance, and Science, 1500 to 1800. In 1492, Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic and set foot in the Americas. Around the same time, Vasco da Gama sailed around the Cape of Good Hope to reach India. By 1511, the Portuguese had taken Malacca, seizing control of one of Asia's most vital maritime trade routes. From these daring voyages, Europe emerged as the global dominator, not just through guns and ships, but with maps and trade. Maritime empires like Spain, Portugal, England, France, and the Netherlands raced to conquer, exploit, and colonize distant lands. Yet alongside this outward expansion, an inner awakening was underway. In Italy, the 15th and 16th centuries marked the Renaissance, a rebirth of classical art, culture, and science. Leonardo da Vinci was both a painter and engineer. Michelangelo carved statues that seemed to breathe life into stone. Further north, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in Wittenberg, 1517, igniting the Protestant Reformation. He challenged the Pope's authority, emphasized personal faith, and translated the Bible into local languages. Religion, once a force of unity, now became a source of division, sparking a series of bloody wars across Europe. But that same spirit of skepticism and debate paved the way for modern science. In 1543, Copernicus proposed the heliocentric theory. The Earth was not the center of the universe. He was followed by Galileo, Kepler, and eventually Newton, whose Principia Mathematica, 1687, laid the foundation for classical mechanics. Meanwhile, Gutenberg's invention of the printing press around 1440 forever transformed how knowledge was shared. New ideas in politics, philosophy, and science began to spread faster than ever before. By the 18th century, a bold new movement emerged, the Enlightenment. Thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, Locke, and Kant questioned authority and championed reason, liberty, and individual rights. They challenged monarchies and promoted equality and civil liberties. Two landmark revolutions brought those ideas to life: the American Revolution, 1776, and the French Revolution, 1789. One declared that all men are created equal. The other beheaded a king and toppled a feudal order. From this point on, a new world began to emerge, one where people believed they could shape their own political destiny through will and reason, rather than bloodlines or divine decree. Part 6: The Industrial Revolution and Empire, 1800 to 1914. Between 1770 and 1820 in Britain, a series of groundbreaking inventions began to permanently transform how humans lived and worked. James Watt's steam engine, the mechanical loom, and the rise of powered machinery didn't just boost productivity. They gave birth to an entirely new mode of production, the industrial factory. This marked the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, first in Britain, then spreading to France, Germany, the United States, and Japan. From smoke-filled cities like Manchester and Birmingham a new society emerged, where time was measured by factory clocks, and human labor was increasingly replaced by machines. Industrialization also shifted the balance of global power. With machine guns, steamships, and railroads, European powers could now deploy troops and transport goods faster, farther, and more effectively than any ancient empire ever could. From 1850 onward, Europe entered the age of imperialism. Britain took over India, Egypt, and South Africa. France seized Indochina. Belgium committed atrocities in the Congo. Germany expanded into Africa and the Pacific. By 1914, nearly all of Africa and much of Asia had been colonized. Meanwhile, Latin American countries such as Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil declared independence from Spain and Portugal around 1820. Yet, despite gaining political sovereignty, they remained economically dependent on Europe and fell into the hands of local elites, often more oppressive than the colonizers they replaced. The colonial system bred deep inequality. Natural resources were extracted, labor exploited, and native cultures suppressed. Resistance arose across the world. The Sepoy Rebellion in India 1857, the Opium Wars in China, and the Taiping Rebellion, in which millions died in pursuit of a heavenly kingdom. In Africa, nations like the Zulu, Ashanti, and Ethiopia fiercely resisted invasion. Only Ethiopia and Liberia managed to retain their independence by the year 1900. By the late 19th century, the great European empires began to distrust one another. Military alliances formed. The Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, Italy, stood against the Triple Entente, Britain, France, Russia. The world stood on a fragile balance, where even the smallest spark could ignite a global inferno. And indeed, just a few years later, a single gunshot in Sarajevo would drag the entire world into a war unlike anything it had ever seen. Part 7. The Century of Upheaval. War, Revolution, and Globalization, 1914 to 1991. On June 28, 1914, a gunshot in Sarajevo killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, igniting a global catastrophe. Within weeks, the world's major empires plunged into World War I. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire faced off against Britain, France, Russia, and later the United States. The war lasted from 1914 to 1918, with trenches, poison gas, tanks, and millions of soldiers dying on Europe's battlefields. When the smoke cleared, the world was forever changed. Nearly 20 million people were dead, and 4 empires had collapsed: Germany, Russia, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Amid the chaos, in 1917, the Russian Revolution broke out. The Tsarist regime was overthrown. The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, seized power and established the world's first communist state, the Soviet Union, 1922. But the world barely had time to recover before crisis struck again. The Great Depression of 1929 plunged tens of millions into unemployment. Fascism rose in Germany, Italy, and Japan. In 1939, World War II began when Germany invaded Poland. This war was even more horrific. The Holocaust claimed over 6 million Jewish lives, and atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. An estimated 70 to 80 million people died, making it the deadliest conflict in human history. In the aftermath, in 1945, the United Nations was founded to prevent another global war. But peace did not follow. A new division emerged: the Cold War between the capitalist United States and the communist Soviet Union. The two superpowers entered a prolonged standoff, marked not by direct combat, but by nuclear arms races, space rivalry, and geopolitical tension. From the Korean War, Vietnam War, to the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962, the world teetered multiple times on the brink of annihilation. Yet the Cold War also drove technological progress and globalization. Jet aircraft, satellites, the internet, and personal computers all emerged in the shadow of superpower competition. By 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. Communism crumbled across Eastern Europe. The Cold War ended. The United States stood as the world's sole superpower. The world entered an era of globalization, seemingly free of the specter of war. But in reality, the deep scars of the 20th century, conflict, inequality, and division, continued to smolder beneath the surface of this newly formed global order. Part 8. The Modern World, A Crossroads of the Future, 1991 to present. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. The Cold War ended. A new world order emerged, unipolar, with the United States as the sole superpower. The world entered an era of globalization, where goods, data, and people moved across borders more freely than ever before. Starting in the 1990s, the rise of the internet fundamentally changed how humanity communicates, learns, and does business. Personal computers and later smartphones put the entire world in the palm of your hand. Capitalism, free trade, and global supply chains became the norm. Emerging economies like China, India, and Brazil grew at breakneck speed. China rose to become the second largest economy, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty. India became a global hub for technology and services, but behind this growth lay deepening inequalities, wealth gaps, resource conflicts, and a mounting environmental crisis. Melting ice, wildfires, droughts, and rising seas, climate change was no longer a distant threat, but a daily reality. Added to this was global terrorism, marked by the September 11th attacks, 2001, prompting the US to launch a decades-long war on terror. Wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and the rise of ISIS plunged the Middle East into new waves of instability. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic erupted, plunging the world into panic and lockdown. Over 6 million lives were lost. Global supply chains broke down. Travel, trade, education, all were disrupted. Globalization, once thought irreversible, suddenly came to a halt. Yet amid the chaos, a new era began to unfold. Artificial intelligence, AI, synthetic biology, quantum computing, and renewable energy are redrawing the lines between human and machine, nature and technology. But these breakthroughs have not brought peace. The Russia-Ukraine War 2022, tensions in the Middle East, the US-China tech rivalry, social polarization, and the manipulation of public opinion through social media have left the world more connected and more divided than ever. Humanity now stands at a historic crossroads. To either repeat the cycle of war, inequality, and crisis, or to shift toward a new model. And just like before, humanity stands at a fork in the road. Either we learn from history, or we are crushed by it once again. If you feel small in the face of this immense timeline, remember this: it is those who reflect, question, and act who truly change the course of history. And if you believe that understanding the past is the only way to master the future, subscribe to this channel now. We will keep telling the stories no one else dares to, about buried empires, forgotten wars, and the lessons humanity is dangerously repeating. Let's continue this journey together, because history is not just something you read, it's something you're living.